If you talk to a bunch of TV critics, you'll pretty quickly get consensus from them that a British spy show on Apple TV is one of the best shows on TV right now. The finale of season 4 just came out. You're going to hear how these spies managed to quietly win over so many critics. I'm Elamin Abdul Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, I think it's fair to say that if I say the word spy thriller, the first thing that comes to mind is like, I don't know, maybe like James Bond or Jason Bourne or like one of those kinds of works. But what if I start things off with this?
Surrounded by losers, misfits and boozers, hanging by your fingernails.
That is the opening theme music to the British spy thriller Slow Horses. This is a show where the spies are not that smooth. They are kind of losers. They make a lot of mistakes. And one of them should definitely take showers a lot more often than he does. The finale for season 4 just wrapped up yesterday to talk about how Slow Horses might just be one of the best shows on TV right now. Saloni Gajjar is here. Sophie Gilbert is here. Saloni and Sophie, welcome to the show, guys. How's it going?
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for having us.
I'm delighted that you guys are here.
So excited to talk Slow Horses.
Hey, listen,
Yeah.
let's get into it. Saloni, I'm going to start with you. What do people need to know about the show if they've never even heard of it? Set up Slow Horses a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you did such a good job right now describing
Oh,
them.
thank you.
But the show is basically based on McCarran's novels. I like to call it an old school British espionage drama because it has all the classic elements. It's fast paced, there are high stakes, it has classic British dry humor. But I think it does find ways to subvert what we know about these elements because it's also about a group of dysfunctional spies. They're sent to work under this very unkempt, grumpy man named Jackson Lamb, played so perfectly by Gary Oldman. And it's kind of about each season has a different story. So it's, I love when a story wraps up by the finale.
Yeah.
And so I think it's easy to keep up with it. It's easy to get lost in the world that they create, which is something I wouldn't describe normally for a spy drama. You want to be in that world. You want to see where these characters are going. It's not just one hero trying to stand out and fight the enemies. It's a group of them who have figured out that they are good together. And so I think it's almost like a hangout comedy in that sense because I want to live with them and spend time with these people. And I think that's what makes it unique for a spy show.
Yeah, you don't get a lot of hangout shows that are based around the world of spy. Like that's what sort of makes a show such a great hang and great time to watch. It also shifts so many emotional gears. I want to get to that in just a moment. But maybe, Sophie, let's root us in season 4 that just wrapped up. So it just wrapped up yesterday. Without any spoilers, what did you think of season 4 of Slow Horses?
I loved season 4. I think one thing that it did so well and that the show does so well is it's so impeccably plotted. Every episode you have like explosions and drama and intrigue and chaos, and you're sort of really, really on the edge of your seat. And season 4 really deepened that, and it stuck to the really super tight plotting, but it also had a little bit more attention to character, which I really appreciated. The central character is River Cartwright, played by Jack Loudon. And I think at the beginning of the season, he's kind of this sort of Trojan horse in a way. He's this bland, sort of ordinary, sort of blondish looking man. And, he kind of could be Daniel Craig, but he's, as the sort of show goes on, you sense that he's really not the most interesting character. the sort of Gary Oldman doing Jackson Lamb. And I think when you think of what people do before they star in Marvel movies, they get the glow up, they get the sort of buffness. What Gary Oldman's doing as Jackson Lamb is the exact opposite of that. It's like de-glamorization to a T. But I really have loved the attention to River in this season. I think it's been amazing to just get a little bit more characterization, and it's really deepened the show for me.
Yeah, we haven't spent a lot of time with River, and then we get to the season, Saloni, and then the sort of the vantage point kind of shifts. Talk about season 4. What worked about it for you?
Yeah, similarly, I loved it. I thought that the attention to River was much needed because in the past 3 seasons, they've established that he's kind of the mentee to Jackson Lamb. But, I think with this season, especially because they bring Jonathan Pryce to the forefront as well, who plays River's grandfather. I think that really helped sell, season 4, which makes it also feel a little bit darker than it has in the past, because we've, at this point, 3 seasons in, developed some sort of affinity for River. So for the season to now look back at him, I feel like it really makes a deeper impact, at least it did for me. I've been describing River as like the resident running man of the show. He's always running somewhere. He's running behind people. He's running from people. And I liked that was still part of the show, but it really had a bigger connection this time.
So I want to talk a little bit about the tone of the show, Sophie, because I think there's something really interesting going on here. Like in your review, you talk about how, when any of these spies show any display of competence, of skill, or ability to do their job, it's almost immediately undercut by deep, deep sort of humiliation. They are underdogs. Like even when they win, you're still kind of like, yeah, but you still kind of lost here. What makes that such a compelling thing to watch on a screen, you think?
Well, I think what the show does so well is it knows that people come into a spy thriller with a certain kind of expectation, and it subverts that expectation at every point. So there's this great scene in the most recent season where River is on the run from some bad guys in a house in France, and he climbs out a window and he's running on the rooftop, and it's very James Bond, and then he immediately falls through and lands on his butt, which is sort of characteristic. And then he keeps running and he pushes someone off a motorbike, and he's about to make this big glamorous escape, but it turned out to be a moped that's so slow that he can barely outrun a dog. So there's all these moments where the show is sort of very funny in that way, but I think what it's also doing at the same time is saying something deeper about power. And I think the show is actually really, really thoughtful about power. It's cynical, but it's not cynical about human beings. It's cynical about the ways in which people pursue power for themselves. And so this is the world of MI5 in the show is one where the people who have succeeded, the people who have power, are the ones who are the worst at their jobs in some ways, but the best at kissing up, the best at playing politics. And then the funny thing about that is the slow horses are actually liberated because they've been evicted from MI5 proper. Yeah. They're free to just kind of do their jobs and do it well, or sometimes not well, as the show turned out. But it's sort of, it's fascinating to see that subversion for me.
I wanted to play a clip from the opening scene of the first episode of season 4. It's like a phone conversation between two spies, between Roddy and Louisa. Listen to this.
Where are you?
None of your business.
Yeah, we were supposed to be at the Chickadoo.
Why?
Our Christmas party.
We don't have a Christmas party. And if we did, we'd have it before Christmas and not at a Chickadoo.
Yeah, well, maybe you're not invited. Maybe Lam only told the elites.
Lam told you about it, though, didn't he?
I asked him where the Christmas party was and he gave me the details.
Right. See if you can work out what happened.
Sophie, look, this is a show, Slow Horses, has won an Emmy for outstanding writing for a drama series. I know you want to talk about the writing on the show. Tell me about what makes the writing on the show pop out for you.
Well, it's doing two things really well. At the dialogue level, it's a really funny workplace comedy. It's kind of a spy thriller written by the people from Veep, which is essentially exactly what it is. I think Will Smith, the show's creator, worked on Veep. But at the same time, it is very well crafted. Like I said earlier, it's very well plotted. I've been watching so much TV recently that just feels saggy. I don't know if you guys have to, but it just, you don't know where it's going. I mean, I love The Bear, but the first episode is 40 minutes and no dialogue and a lot of flashbacks. And it feels kind of acid trippy and moody and vibey, but you don't know where it's going, and often you're on the phone scrolling the whole time, or I am anyway. Don't tell my bosses. But the thing about Slow Horses is it's just so well crafted, and it has that feeling that you feel from like prestige shows of old that were written by these guys who worked in network television, and they had to churn out 24 episodes, and there was a formula, but it was very well done and it was very tight. And Slow Horses often has that feeling to me. It's the one show where I start watching. If I have the episodes, I cannot stop. It's so thrilling, and you really, really want to know what's happening next.
Yeah, I mean, like, even though these seasons are only 6 episodes long, it's such tight writing that I really like the idea of, there's so much saggy kind of television, not here. Everything's very, very kind of taut and pulled together. Saloni, I think like something really interesting about how the show mixes a lot of different genres and sort of flips through a lot of different moods, even, within the same scene, let alone within the same episode. And you just don't see that a lot on American television. I think like British TV has a bit more of a history of doing that well. Can you talk about like how you see that playing out in Slow Horses?
Yeah, definitely. I think for any show that labels itself a spy drama, we've established that there's an expectation when you're going in. So it's hard to juggle different types of genres, like
Yeah.
the hangout, the workplace, the banter, sometimes even romance, even if it isn't like the focus. So, and I think, it's very rare. I think I can think of a handful of examples where it's gone well. I always refer to The Americans as an example, and I think Slow Horses is another great example of that, because it actually spends time cultivating the chemistry between these people, because essentially, like Sophie so well pointed out, they're just supposed to do their jobs. They're not burdened by the MI5, the jingoism. They can just do what they're good at or not good at.
Yeah.
And I think that frees the show and the writing up to go in these different narrative directions. They can spend time between two characters at a bar flirting, but not really flirting with each other. And, I think you can, and that pays off again in 6 episodes later in the finale.
Yeah.
So I think that there's like a really smart way that they handle it. And yeah, it's very rare, but I think again, it helps make the show, a show with such high stakes, feel oddly relatable to a common man.
Yeah.
And I think that's also not something you get when you're seeing spy dramas.
Also tell you this, that like very few shows are pretty chill with killing off their main characters. And I love that, because like that for me puts me immediately sort of like on the back foot. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. This show does not seem to be that attached to this character. They could kill them any moment. And I like that brings me into a show. That makes me lean in a little bit more, because then the stakes are, a little bit less predictable. And I love that feeling as I'm watching TV. Look, I'm going to ask you, Sophie, since you've talked about how this is one of the best shows on TV right now. You're often trying to get people to watch a show, and like that is not a necessarily easy thing to do. What's been like the best selling point that's worked in terms of trying to convince people to go like, hey, you got to go spend some time with Slow Horses?
Yeah, usually I think if you say the words Gary Oldman to British people, they're kind of hooked from the beginning.
Yes.
Gary Oldman looking like he's been dragged through a chip fryer. There's all kinds of ways to sell it. I think the acting is just impeccable. The casting is so good. Like I said, the story is so tight. Usually once people start, I don't have a hard time persuading them to carry on. It's more about just like, you have to trust this platform called Apple that you've possibly never watched a show on before, but it's worth it, I promise.
It has been a recurring theme on this show, on Commotion, for us to try to be like, what is happening? How does Apple have the best shows and so few people watching them? We can add this conversation to that category. Saloni and Sophie, I'm going to say thank you. I really appreciate you guys being here. This has been tremendous. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, of course.
Such a pleasure.
Anytime. Sophie Gilbert is a staff writer at The Atlantic. She's based in London, England. Saloni Gajjar is a TV staff writer at the AV Club in New York City. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This is Commotion. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are on their final stretch, sort of media blitz, with less than a month to go until the American election. This week, Kamala has appeared on The View, on 60 Minutes, but she kicked it all off with the pop culture podcast Call Her Daddy. This is a hugely popular show. I don't think popular, the word, covers how popular the show is. It's hosted by Alex Cooper. It's particularly popular with women of all political stripes. Just to give you some background here, Call Her Daddy started out as a sex podcast on Barstool Sports, but it's evolved a lot into an incredibly profitable interview show where celebrities talk about sex and relationships and maybe also their art from time to time. In the past, Alex has kind of said explicitly that her show is not political, so announcing Kamala Harris as her guest was a bit of a surprise. Here's a bit of the interview where they discuss access to abortion, starting with Kamala.
If she chooses, she'll talk to her priest, her pastor, her rabbi, her imam, but not the government telling you what to do. And that's what's so outrageous about it, is a bunch of these guys up in these state capitals are writing these decisions because they somehow have decided that they're in a better position to tell you what's in your best interest than you are to know what's in your own best interest. It's outrageous.
It's outrageous. I mean, daddy gang, to put it in our TikTok terms, I have seen girls on the street walk up to men and be like, do you know where a tampon goes? Do you know how many tampons we use?
That is a bit of Kamala Harris on Call Her Daddy this week. Joan Summers is here to unpack all of this with me. Joan, thanks for coming back on the show.
Hi, Elamin. How are you?
Joan, are you daddy gang? Like, is that like a part of your general lifestyle? Do you listen to the show very often? Do you listen to Call Her Daddy very often?
I listen to Call Her Daddy in so much as it is my job to know what the youth are saying and what the podcasts they're listening to are all about. I would not say I am a personal member of Daddy Gang.
That's reasonable. That's reasonable.
Yeah.
Nor should you identify as such. That's totally fine.
No.
Let's talk about the reaction to this interview. It's been really fascinating because it's been really intense and really critical online. What do you make of the reaction, the really intense reaction to this interview?
I mean, I don't know if you've paid attention to the temper or the tenor of conversation about politics in America right now generally, but I think it goes to show how increasingly chaotic and disorganized and stratified like all levels of the political conversation are right now, you know? Like people are raw, people are emotional, people are upset, rightfully so in many ways. And so, you know, there is very little, I think, online, politically speaking, that doesn't immediately incite a reaction from people in this election. And specifically, I think in this case, when they feel that their time is being sort of taken for a ride, I think especially they think in an election with so many stakes, they're like, call her daddy, really? I think that a lot of it is also based on probably misogyny as well from like seasoned male reporters who think that, you know, women's interests are frivolous. This is something I've encountered much in my life writing about politics. They think like, why would you want to read a blog written by feminists to talk about politics when you can read my Politico newsletter that publishes at 4 a.m. every day on the dot? Like, but I think there's a lot of things happening. I think it's a really interesting reaction.
100%. I think like there's a lot packed into the tone of that reaction. I mentioned Alex Cooper has been kind of explicit about the podcast not being political before. She knows that she has like listeners on both sides of the political spectrum. I just want to play you this bit because before the conversation with Kamala Harris, Alex Cooper explained why she's doing the interview. Let's play a clip of that now.
Every single week, I talk about topics like mental health, relationships, sex, sexuality, trauma. Overall, my focus is women and the day-to-day issues that we face. So, I will be honest. I had been going back and forth with this decision for a while. But at the end of the day, I couldn't see a world in which one of the main conversations in this election is women, and I'm not a part of it.
Joan, there's a lot packed into that, including the notion that like somehow this is the first election where one of the main issues is women, because like certainly clearly that's not true. I want to talk about
invented women in 2020.
Yeah, huge.
We're a new thing. Yeah,
huge invention in the political arena. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about like how Alex has kind of maneuvered her way through what might be one of the key interviews of this election cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say that I found it to be pretty cynical, and I don't mean that to say it's not smart or calculated or anything, but I found it to sort of want to play both sides of the fence. As we heard, you know, she reaches out to Donald Trump. She says that I reached out, he declined, but he's welcome to come on if he wants to talk about women. And also that it was a decision she sort of went back and forth with, right? Like she's now changing the rules of her podcast. She's changing the terms that her audience have engaged with her on. And I think it's interesting how she sort of refuses to land on a side while still ultimately taking a side. I think it's a symptom of content like this where, you know, you start a podcast with your friend about sex stories that you both share with each other and like sort of gossip in your area. And then suddenly you're interviewing the next
presidential candidate
of the United States of America, right? So I think that like, you know, she has stepped into a new world. She's obviously learning the rules of that world. But I also think it's interesting how you can feel her playing to advertisers and subscribers at the same time. Like, I did reach out to Trump just in case anyone's going to get mad. He declined, but I'd still have him if he wants to. And I wonder if there is a world where Trump actually does take her up on that offer now, right? Like, we're running out of time in this election, but like, you know, if he does, he'll tell us about it, right? And if she declines, then that sort of negates that whole cold open. So I there's a deeply cynical part of me that wants him to call her on that bluff, but who knows? Maybe he will.
Joan said both eyes awake. Okay, let's talk about what was actually in the interview, because they talked about abortion, they talked about sexual abuse, they talked about women's autonomy of their bodies. How did you feel about like the way the discussion actually unfolded?
I think that this is something that people have talked about Kamala quite often. You know, there are times where she's become sort of this goofy character for like her clips, like the coconut tree infamously.
like a
in the
meme sort of.
context.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also, I think really what people have seen is she is quite a skilled communicator and very deft at like maneuvering a conversation. Alex Cooper is not a reporter on 60 Minutes. She's not a seasoned talk show host that has been on the air for a million years. And you can see her sort of struggling to keep the pace of this conversation, but that's sort of something that she does on the podcast generally. She lets people go off on these tangents and sort of doesn't challenge them. And so you can see Kamala taking advantage of that quite often to sort of stay in the realm of emotions throughout the conversation. You know, she plays to a lot of emotional notes. She talks about her own personal history with sexual assault in her life with a friend growing up. She talks about her relationship with her mother and the lessons that her mother sort of instilled in her. And I do think that this is what people are really wanting now, for better or for worse. They don't want a hard-hitting investigation with facts about someone's platform, what their actual plans are for the economy, what they actually plan to do about, you know, reinstating constitutional abortion rights. They want to hear about if this person is their friend, if this person is someone that they can drink wine with and talk about their problems with, you know? And I think Kamala has recognized that. There was that early explosion where people were like, we don't even care what she stands for. Like, we're just so happy you're here now. So I do think that she really plays up to that. It's a smart move by her, but I just don't know how long that might last. You know, that goodwill is starting to wear a little thin as she continues to evade questions about what her platforms really are.
But I'm glad you brought that
very
up.
little policy substance.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think like the paper of record has talked about this election being not an election about issues, but more of a vibe election. That's a direct quote from the New York Times. The idea that like that people are sort of measuring these candidates based on vibe. So into that arena enters an interview that is not explicitly not a political quote unquote interview. It's not like a regular sort of journalist interview. It is an interview with a show that is based in pop culture, based in entertainment. What is lost, you think, and what is gained by having politicians on these platforms instead of talking to journalists?
You know, I think that there is a justifiable fear amongst journalists that like we are slowly being phased out of our profession by people who act more like spokespeople than actual like journalists or inquiry people. You know, they will say this like in the tech world that these new tech founders don't want to go on, a reporting trip with a New York Times reporter. They want to sit down with a tech reviewer who they send iPads to, right? Because that's the one that's going to let you just say whatever you want, spill your little secrets and advertise you. And I think politicians are sort of playing to that as well. Like they are recognizing that they can sort of penetrate directly to a base without having to actually be challenged. And they sort of get to take the speech off of the podium and into people's podcasting lives, right? Like Tim Waltz is going on a Twitch stream for World of Warcraft later today, I believe, or this week. And it sort of echoes what we saw with, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez when she was also on Twitch campaigning or pushing for things. You know, that is a very effective way to get your message out now. But it also means that there is something being lost, which is a real, actual, truthful, honest conversation about policy proposals. You know, that is something that journalists are experts at, for better or for worse. And it is something that her campaign is lacking. And so
that's true.
I think she's campaigning, like you said, on vibes. She's campaigning on goodwill. She's campaigning on a dream. I think we've seen this sort of thing before. And ultimately, I don't think it really works out for presidents in the end. You know, like if she actually is successful in this election, I'm very curious to see what her first, you know, few months look like.
Yeah. But I mean, like that's a political reality. At least right now, we're still sort of existing in, let's say what it is, which is like quote unquote entertainment reality, right? Like, I mean, like, and she's literally running against a former reality show star. To me, like having this conversation with Call Her Daddy is an attempt to sort of like move the conversation onto her turf, into like saying, this is the vibe that I'm trying to bring to the table if we're going to, you know, use the term vibe election. Joan, I think we got to leave it there, pal. But, you know, thank you so much for your time and your energy and your expertise. We'll revisit this daddy gang idea later. But in the meantime, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, anytime. Joan Summers is a culture writer at Paper Magazine. She's in New York. My name is Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We are going to be back tomorrow with our end of the week rap panel. We have a lot to talk about. And so I will see you then. In the meantime, have a great day.